British Chamber and also trustee. And we're very pleased to be having this webinar today. This is going to be on the Arise bill. And we have one of the principal authors, which is Congresswoman Sharon Garin. Today's event, I'm being supported as a team effort. We have lots of chambers, and this is the work we do together. I will run through the other chambers in alphabetical order. So we have the French Chamber, we have the Dutch Chamber, we have the European Chamber, we have the German Chamber, we have the Nordic Chamber, and we also have the Spanish Chamber. And just to be very fair, the Nordic Chamber is the one hosting the platform, so particular thanks to them. But also many thanks to all the other chambers. And I just want to say this is how we operate as a team effort. All the European chambers are interested in how the country is developing and how we can support it. So thanks again to my fellow chambers. What I will do today is quickly introduce our speaker and then hand it over to Cong Sharon, who will then present to us on Arise. I will then moderate afterwards some questions. Please send your questions because obviously a lot of interest. So what we have today is Congresswoman Sharon Garin. She is the co-chair of the Economic Stimulus Committee, together with Jerry Salceda and Stella Quimbo. She's also the chairperson of the House Committee on the Economic Affairs and vice chair of the House of Ways and Means Committee, Banks and Financial Intermediaries, Globalization as WTO. She hails from Iloilo, and she's also been involved in many other different financial acts. She was also responsible for being involved with the CETRA, mining tax, excise tax on alcohol and tobacco. She also has a very impressive resume, which is an accounting degree from UP, a Juris Doctor law degree from Ateneo de Manila, and also an international MBA from Barcelona, Asiadi in Spain. And she's the first party list representative to be elected as Deputy Speaker of the Philippine House of Representatives. We're very pleased and honored to have Congresswoman Sharon Garin. There is a particular interest on the Arise bill. The final thing I just want to emphasize is that 50% of the British Chamber members are small to medium-sized companies, and they are particularly affected by, obviously, the crisis of the challenge. So therefore, any economic support. But that's a fact, and I believe 90% of all companies in the Philippines are medium to small enterprises. So a rise in the economic stimulus and support is particularly needed, and that's why all of the chambers are listed today, along with many other business groups, are so interested in throwing their support behind this bill. So let me first of all hand over and say once again, many thanks for your time. And we look forward to hearing from you. And obviously, if you'd be happy then to take questions after your presentation. Congressman Sharon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, to all the chambers. It's an honor to be here, and I hope I explained to you extensively and clearly. But I'm not an economist by education nor by training. Joey Salceda and Stella Kimbo are more adept at that topic, so I can translate for you from them. So what happened to us was the Philippine situation is we had COVID and then we had the lockdown. We had a lockdown since March, the longest ever, I think, in the whole world. It started March 15, and until now, we don't even know where we are. But we're still limited in terms of movement as well as in business. So the effect, because we had the lockdown and we also had COVID, we have about, last report was about 17.7% unemployment. But mind you, that's not just it. There's still people, I mean, not everyone who does not have a job reports that they don't have a job. Some people just don't look for jobs anymore because they know they won't find any. And there's also the part of people who are vulnerable. Um, that that's 12.9 million people that are still vulnerable, because if you have to consider, some companies are going to go retrench, some companies are going to to reformat their employment because of the health protocols. And so what do we expect from this? We expect the GDP forecast to be much lower than we were used to be, from 6 to 7%. If you look at all the predictions of the forecast of all the different companies, I have it here. IMF says it's 0.6% for the forecast. S&P negative 0.2. World Bank negative 1.9. DBCC, that's ours, negative 3.5, and then there's ADB, which is negative 3.8. It ranges from negative 3.8 to 0.6, but that's basically all the forecasts are way lower. So what are we waiting for? We're waiting first, because we can't wait for the vaccine. The vaccine is probably 2 years from now or a year from now. But so what the House of Representatives has been doing, and has done actually, is pass laws that stimulate the economy. These are the economic stimulus, in which I am co-chairing with Stella and Joey, who have both trained me on on the economic side of the issue. And what we have come up is a rise. It was just PESA bill originally. We had to change the name because there's a similar bill that similarly named. So the Arise bill is actually 1.3 trillion. Other than the Arise, we still have Bayanihan 2, we have Cures Act, and all the other laws that are no, bills that we have passed in Congress. Unfortunately, though, we are in recess because by constitution we have to be in recess before the SONA, and SONA is on July 27, if I'm not mistaken. At least 1 month before that, we cannot have session. So I'll explain to you what is Arise, and hopefully we are trying to come to a compromise. It's 1.3 trillion. We're trying to come to a compromise because there's an issue about the budget that's involved. So I'll 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 start explaining to you. I'll share, if you allow me to share the screen. Wait, hold on. Okay, they're not in order, but we'll make do of this. All right. Okay. So here's the situation in the Philippines. If many of your companies are MSMEs, then this is what's happening to you. Because of ECQ or the quarantine, we had to close companies or businesses. Closure of non-essential businesses, meaning those that are not essential. The essentials are food, pharmacy, supermarkets. So because you had to close your company, so there's a liquidity problem because you had to pay your employees out of obligation or out of your own kindness. You had to pay them their salaries for at least 2 months. And for a small company, that's too much. 1 month maybe, but the second month you'd have to dig into your pockets or get withdraw from your own personal accounts in order to sustain the wages. So that's what we call pay wages but no sales period. There's outflow but there's no inflow. So that's basically a liquidity problem, and that will keep on going. And because of COVID as well, the second point is that because of COVID, there's a change in behavior in the people. There's fear. There's also, because of that fear, nobody wants to go out, nobody wants to travel, and nobody wants to go on tour. So basically, even without ECQ, this industries, transportation, tourism, those are highly impacted industries because of COVID-19, not just because of ECQ. Even if we do away with the quarantine by now or next month, I think the problems with transportation as well as tourism will continue on until the fear factor of the people is gone. So what's the basic effect? It's first and foremost the daily wage and informal workers. Because if you let go of people, those are the first people that you let go. That's 30 million workers, basically. The second would be the overseas workers, overseas Filipino workers. Some have been repatriated, some couldn't leave. So right now, fearless forecast would be 500,000 would come back to the Philippines. Those are the people that you see on TV that are stranded in the streets near NAIA or in the military camps, that are wanting to go home, but they need to be tested and all that. So there's about 500,000 that we expect. And that's a major problem because that will affect our GDP, because the OFWs actually contribute 10% to our GDP or GNP. Now, micro, small, and medium enterprises are basically 1 million establishments, and they employ about 6 million workers that will be affected. And this is a major problem. This is where a stimulus should focus on. And non-essential business services, basically bayanihan law, listed what are essential, and essential services are the ones that are allowed to operate during ECQ or GQ or whatever kind of quarantine level. So these are the ones, the non-essential businesses are the ones that were forced to close business for during the quarantine, and that are, according to our calculations, about 17 million workers, and probably they spent about 66 billion pesos in wages, even without sales. Critical industries, this is what I mentioned earlier, would be tourism, trade, which is like our import-export, because of the downturn of international business. Then if somebody doesn't produce a car in Malaysia, somebody here in the Philippines is going to be affected. The company will be affected. So there's tourism is 5.4 million, which is around 12.7% of the GDP. Trade and manufacturing, this is a major, I think they claim they're 30% of GDP, 500,000 workers. Aviation and transportation is basically about 8% GDP, and the MSMEs, 6.6 million workers. So these are this is the effect of the quarantine. So if you look at the effect on the business side, on the economic side, it's basically unemployment due to liquidity problems of the businesses. And so what we have come up with is address the problem, make a stimulus bill or economic stimulus law by addressing liquidity and unemployment. What is reported is that we are actually losing about almost 2 trillion pesos because of COVID-19. And we have come up with certain numbers, and our number is about 700 billion should be spent in order to stimulate the economy through an economic stimulus bill. So what we have done is this. This is the map of our proposal. This is a rice bill in one page. First and foremost, why isn't your business working right now? It's because of the fear factor. It's because people don't want to get out of their houses. Because they don't want to get out of their houses, they don't go to shop or they don't go out eat. And because of that, workers will not go to work. They're scared of getting out. And because of workers don't go to work, consumers don't consume, businesses cannot open properly, or they won't open at all. In fact, I'm from Iloilo, and many of there are schools, not only restaurants, schools are closing, restaurants are closing, many businesses are closing already. So what we first address is fear factor. Fear factor, how do you address that? There should be massive testing, whether it's rapid test kit or PCR testing. My idea of for rapid testing or for massive testing is that if an LGU wants to restart their economy, they have to do mass testing. If they want the tricycle drivers to start going around their town, transporting people, why don't they test every tricycle driver so people won't get scared and people know that these tricycle drivers get tested regularly? If the LGUs, if the mayors want people to start buying in their markets, public markets, they can test every stall owner or seller so that people will have the confidence and the fear factor will slowly die down. It's to start the wheels turning and start addressing the fear factor. So for this, we proposed a 20 billion or 10 billion per year appropriation for testing kits. Now you address the fear factor and then you go to the stimulus so that businesses would start. So first we have transitional, financial, sectoral, and structural. Transitional is more of the immediate need. It's what businesses need right now. Financial is to address the liquidity problem. Sectoral is to address each industry that are critically impacted, and structural is more of reforms that are more long term. So transitional is actually an immediate response after ECQ. This is where the importance of employment plays. First, we give wage subsidies, which is about 50 to 75% of the monthly payroll. We give it to the company, not to the employee, with the condition that do not lay off. So it's pegged or it's tied up to employment. You get your subsidy if you keep your employees employed. Now, for those that have to let go of their employees, that's only 2 months though. That's the only I think that's the most that we can afford um, uh, based on the budget of our government, what's available now because we are spending so much for bayanihan already. Now, second, if people do get retrenched and they're out of work, then we have cash for work. Cash for Work is the emergency employment program of the Department of Labor and Employment, in which they need to work in order for them to get paid. It's called sweat investment. You have to work for what you get, not the social amelioration that people get for every household, which is 5,000 to 8,000 pesos. That is not sustainable nor affordable for the government. So we propose a cash for work. In fact, they can hire contact tracers with this money as well. So then the problem with students, because there's a big problem in education because many schools are contemplating closing up because basically when the teachers don't teach, they don't get paid. When people are not employed, then there are less students that will get employed. And even if they get enrolled, even if students enroll, there's still a problem of how do they the the mode of the education is still a problem because they want it online, they don't want it online. We still don't know because if you want it online, the infrastructure is not enough. If you want it face to face, then there's the health protocols that we have to address. So there's assistance to students, and then the OFW relief. In addition to the PhilHealth, we also recommend the livelihood programs because we don't expect them to go back to work. This industry won't go back to normal in 2 to 3 years, as discussed by Joey in my other webinar just earlier, an hour ago. And then there's the loan extension for the banks for the principal payments. It's because when companies who already have loans in banks, um, because of what is happening now, they probably won't be able to pay anyway. So in order not to make the bank suffer, our recommendation is just postponement of payment of the principal. And this will help not only the borrowers, also the banks, because unpaid loans is not good for the records of the banks and not good for their business as well. So that's a loan extension only as far as PSP is concerned, as far as principal is concerned. Regulatory relief, these are the usual requests like for the SSS, suspension of payments, not moratorium, because you cannot do a moratorium of all payments because all these GOCCs and all the banks uh, will will go bankrupt. So it's more of a suspension of payments for them. Um, Regularization of MSMEs. There are millions of MSMEs or micro and small companies that are not registered. So this is a big problem if you want to do stimulus package. If they are not registered, they won't be able to get anything. So there should be a regularization of MSMEs. Now, so with this, since it's pegged, especially the cash for work and wage subsidies, they're tied up to employment. Then this will protect employment for the next 2 months. And during those 2 months, while the company is still restructuring or changing their business or intending to sell it, then the financial intervention will come in. Financial intervention means that they can borrow cheap loans or probably zero rated loans. So, first of all, one requirement, again, this is tied to employment. If you want to borrow money, if you want to get 0% interest loans, then you have to retain your labor force, 75% of them. If not, then you cannot avail of the loan. So first is the credit mediation and refinancing service, in which, because many of the MSMEs, I don't know about your group, but many MSMEs, especially those that are not registered, do not know how to take out a loan. So we need to set up a system in order for them to be able to avail of it. We don't want the liquidity of the banks now to go only to big companies. We want them, because of the know your client system that they have. So we want the LGUs as well as DTI and all the agencies to help these MSMEs to regularize and have them avail of the loans that are available. So one of the best companies when it comes to micro and small companies is the SB Corporation, Small Business Corporation. This is under DTI, and they can act. They're experts in micro and small companies and in the informal sector. They can avail of the loans from SB Corp, and in fact, if the government allows, they can give out zero interest loans, and then still they should retain 75% of their labor force. Zero interest loans, this is through LBP and DBP. Same conditions, small, medium, and agri-fishery. And then loan guarantee, this is what is most interesting in the bigger companies, because, or even the small companies, uh, if they will take out loans during this time, no bank would give loans anyway, because they know that businesses are in bad shape right now. So PGC, Philippine Guarantee Corporation, is somewhat of a government guarantee on loans taken out. They will guarantee the loans that are taken out to the MSME or even bigger companies or the informal sector. So this would complement what is already there in the financial interventions. PGC will guarantee the loans under LBP and DBP, or if DBP and LBP use private banks as conduits, then they can do so, but PGC can still guarantee. So that will address the liquidity, and that will, with the transitional and the financial MSMEs especially, um, will be able to survive. Whether they stay in the same business or a different business, then, but at least we have protected the employees, and then the financial intervention is there already. That's in addition to what BSP is doing already, because BSP is doing a fantastic job in terms of banking interventions. They've loosened up on the reserve requirements and everything, and I think Governor Jokno has been very, very proactive in terms of addressing what or forward thinking and on what the country needs in terms of banking needs. And then there's sectoral. Now, when we talk about sectoral, these are targeted for critically impacted industries. Basically, that's MSMEs, tourism, industry and service sectors, and then transportation, uh, agriculture, and that's it. Those five. Okay. MSMEs, I think we all know that. That's 1 million establishments, and we're trying to save 3.6 million jobs. And what DTI will do is intervene in terms of what they need. Give grants, give trainings, digitalization. There's a smaller amount appropriated for this, and this is most just focus on MSMEs. Now, on tourism, tourism is won't survive without government intervention. Their campaign now is to for domestic tourism, but with that, still they will still need to do some repurposing, restructuring. So uh, DOT is proposing the programming of the funds actually came from DOT, in which the many of the companies will have to address the will have to address the health protocols, as well as change their business design, because tourism is really, really difficult now. And I think the best course, as DOT said, is to focus on domestic tourism, which is probable because we're 100 million population. So, and people are itching to go somewhere. And then number three is assistance to industry and service sectors. These are export, import, as well as service providers. And we have allotted a big amount here in order to address that. For example, we prioritize companies that would go for medical health-related industries, like for production of ventilators, for production of masks or PPEs. So there's preference there. And then the assistance to the transportation. The hardest hit here is the air transport. Aviation is, I think, losing, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 7 billion a month. Without all aviation companies in the whole world get subsidy or intervention from the government, and hopefully we follow suit as well, because we have three major companies, and I think they really need intervention for them to survive. And then, but we cannot let go of aviation in this country. It's an archipelago, and it will affect tourism as well as commerce. And then land is also a problem, because by the regulation, only 50% capacity is allowed. So they had to redesign their jeepneys and buses, and have less income. And so that's a difficult time for them. One proposal is to give fuel subsidy to jeepney drivers. And agri-fishery. This is not an impacted industry. The farmers produce even if there's quarantine. People still eat their vegetables and their rice even if there's ECQ. But we have learned a lesson here is that we cannot. We have problems in logistics, supply going from farm to fork. We still have a problem in the logistics. So what we have learned with COVID is we had to have food security. And if we cannot wait until the 2021 reforms or 2021 budget, we have to start now in making sure that we have enough food for 100 million Filipinos or foreigners who are here today. And then, and number 6 is the condonation of the loans of the Garin for beneficiaries, because under the land bank, there are many loans that are unpaid or because of the agrarian reform. So the idea is just to condone all those loans so that the properties can go back to market and be utilized for production or for any commercial purpose. So that's basically the three major proposals that we have: transitional, financial, and sectoral. Structural is more of long term. National Development Corporation is the company that's a bailout company of the Philippines. It bailed out many companies previously, One probably recent example is Philippine Airlines, in which it bought equities of Philippine Airlines until it recovered, and then it sold the equity with certain conditions, of course. And that the idea is to revive that. But our latest version of the bill, which I haven't incorporated in this table, is that it will be a new company, as recommended by Congressman Salceda. And then enhanced BBB, if you know, that's a build project of a government. The uh, any stimulus package in any country always involves infrastructure, because infrastructure's multiplier effect is 3.44. There's employment, there's income for people, and then it's just one of the best ways to stimulate the economy. And what we propose is not to reduce or in fact touch budget on infrastructure, um, which some are proposing right now. In fact, we are proposing to increase it by 650 billion this year, for the next 3 years. And then there's some monetary policies that we propose, depending on with respect to the independence of the Banco Central, or the central bank. So basically, the proposal of the House of Representatives is this table. Address the fear factor, transitional, financial, sectoral, and structural. And the total of this, without the enhanced PBB, is about 585 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And with the BBB, that would be about 1.3 billion. So about 600 plus 600, yes, 1.2 trillion. Now, if we go to the budget, which is the argument right now, 568 billion in total. Wage subsidies would be the massive testing would be about 10 billion per year, and the wage subsidies, this is what would interest your group more, would be 110 billion. Dole cash for work would be 30 billion. Included in that, though, is the test training for any other employees that want to change their jobs, or OFWs that want to undergo training, and then assistance to students, OFW. So that's 110. The major proposal is the 110 billion wage subsidies through DOLE. Through the financial, we have several proposals as well. It's multi-year, and the loan guarantee is 40 billion for this year. Why only 40 billion? Because PGC only guarantees has to shell out 10% of your loan in order to guarantee your loan. So it doesn't need the whole amount of your loan. It only needs 10% of your loan. Now, so basically 40 billion is about 40 times 10, that's 400 billion pesos guaranteed. No, times 2, that would be 800 billion guaranteed. Now, for sectoral, this is one of the biggest that we have proposed. That's 10 billion for MSMEs through DTI. For tourism, that's 58 billion. Assistance to the industry and service sectors. That includes the PESA industries as well. That's 44 billion. Assistance to transportation, that's 70 billion. And assistance to agri-fishery, 56 billion, because Secretary Dar has a beautiful proposal in what he wants to do. And I think he's one of the most competent secretaries as well. And then the condonation to of loans is without cost. So then NDC, enhanced BBB, which I mentioned, 650. So basically that's about 650 plus 600. So that's about 1.25 trillion. That's a big amount. And we are still we are still negotiating on this, and we are hoping that we get to a point that both houses approve a common version, and that's amenable as well for the economic team in the executive. All right. So that's a rise, you know. What's the status now? We're still waiting. It's without effort on any side, but it's just that we have to come to an agreement on what we want. So I would one proposal is to stagger it, pay 1/3 for this month, and then in a couple of months, when you reach a certain level of all the factors we meet all the variables that is targeted by our economic team, then we add another 280, and then once we reach another level, then we add another 280, and that would be 3 tranches. That's the proposal now, and cannot I cannot predict when or how much, because it's still under negotiations. But I would like to assure that we are working on it, especially the House of Representatives, and we have not stopped since March trying to push for this bill. Right now, we have Arise, the one I'm talking about. We have Bayanihan 2, which is a smaller scale Arise, only up to 150 billion, but similar in proposal. That's like a baby Arise. And then there's the Cures Act, which is basically infrastructure. So what happens now? Since we have done we have already done the proposal on the we have already done the proposal on the stimulus. I would like to add another topic, Chris, if you allow me. Our next stage right now is what do we do now? Let's say there's the stimulus package, and what next? We want what the House of Representatives and my committee as well is working on is how do we change policy structures for the long term. What we are trying to do is formulate policies that would make the Philippines a more resilient economy. What's resilience? It's basically how we define is the ability of an economy to withstand or recover from exogenous shocks. An exogenous shock is pandemic, natural disasters, global financial crisis. We have learned from COVID, we have learned from this pandemic, and now what do we do? So what we are doing is a long-term plan of how do we address, how do we reach a certain level of economic resilience. So I'll show you. Sorry, I just got out of another, so I haven't, here you go. Okay. So let's see what's happening in the Philippines right now. This is like a snapshot of what is the status of the Philippines for now. And this will be the basis of, these are our baseline indicators. These are the aspects that we consider for us to formulate better a Philippine economic resilience in the future. So on infrastructure, roads and transport, 75% of NCR workers rely on public transport, and it's not the best in the country, in the world. We lose about 2.04, 1 billion, 1 billion lost daily because of traffic, because of transportation problems. On data, there's a 10.5 million informal operations. It's 10.5 that are not registered. That's more than 10 times more than the registered ones. Connectivity, we have 73 million internet users, 67% of the population. But the infrastructure is not enough for us to go work from home, connectivity, for education. There's not enough infrastructure. If we only have Globe and Smart, that's not enough. They cannot address the problems of all Filipinos if we go digital tomorrow. Now, housing, there's a housing backlog of 3.9 million households. On health, 6 out of 10 Filipinos die without ever seeing a doctor. And that speaks poorly of our primary healthcare and even a universal healthcare. On education, 26% of public schools are connected to the internet. So we have 74% that are not. On government capacity, there's no disaster risk reduction department. The Department of Disaster Risk Reduction should be the one handling any pandemic. If they handle disasters, they should also handle pandemics. The tax effort, we are still not very good. There's 14.7%, while the rest of Southeast Asia or Asia are better than us, other than Malaysia and Indonesia. And food security, our paddy yield is very low, and we import our import dependency and ratio for food is 29%. Now, as to social protection, unemployment assistance, we have 6.7 billion budget for 2020 and 1.2 billion have already been used for Bayanihan. SSS, there's 36.2% private workers, 14,895 unemployment beneficiaries. So the list goes on. And social health insurance, universal health coverage, we already have that very, very nice law, but the implementation is lacking. And then for financial inclusion, even though you say that there's so much money in the banks, 77% of Filipinos are unbanked. They do not have access to banks, or they don't have bank accounts. On labor, we still have a problem of inflexible labor laws. Now that we have health protocols, it is very difficult to retrench or reduce salaries because of our labor laws. And then the competitive business environment, we are 95th in the ease of doing business and 64th in the global competitiveness report. Is very low. That's why we need some more laws in order to open up the economy. On the industrial policy, the GDP rates sharing would be, as I mentioned earlier, tourism is 12%, exports is 30%, transportation is 4%, and agriculture is 8%. If you see agriculture, it's supposed to be an agriculture country. It's still very low. It's the problem is we are our efficiency. You know, the productivity of every farmer is, there's not less farmers, but the productivity is going lower and lower. It has not improved at all. So basically, what are our proposals? We are currently doing a series of seminars, hearings, and webinars and all that for us to assess the whole economy. We are assessing transportation, agriculture, and all that. But we want a more resilient country. We want a country that can sustain any pandemic or any disaster that will happen in the future. That if there's another pandemic, our health institutions will be able to cope. That if there's any disaster in the future, food will arrive at the tables of the families. That if there's any financial crisis, our laborers are protected. So hopefully we can come up with something within the year. This is a very complicated process that we are doing, and we are trying to do it as extensively as we can. We have just had a meeting with the former president, Macapagal-Arroyo, and we have been talking to some governors as well as agencies. And this is the next step that we want to show to people that we are working on. That Congress, that the House of Representatives especially, is addressing stimulus, has a stimulus package. Now that we are still waiting for the negotiations on this package, while in fact we all have already passed it. We are now on the level of doing policy reforms, economic reforms or industry reforms in order for this country, which your companies are doing business, for them to be more sustainable and we reach a certain level of economic growth. The target based on the 2040 projection will be 7% every year. And we are hoping with these reforms that it will be a progressive country, whether with a pandemic or a disaster or anything, that that we can be able to establish new reforms, whether in the Department of Agriculture, Health, or any agency, that will be able to sustain a very resilient economy. So hopefully with that, we can help this economy keep going despite the pandemic, despite the setbacks, and hopefully we can reach a certain level within our generation or within the generation of our children that this will be a very progressive country. So thank you very much for the opportunity. That's it.
Okay. So first
I
of all,
hope you
many
did.
thanks. Many
Yes.
thanks, Congressman Cong, Sharon. That was a very impressive presentation. I think you're okay to take some questions, correct?
Yes, of course. If I can answer
Uh,
them.
I'm sure you can. You're very, very impressive. I just say so, first of all, to all the people who've been attending and sending things in, first of all, this webinar is recorded. So through the various chambers who are cooperating today, we will provide that recording. I think also Cong Sharon will have no problem sharing the slides, if we may have the slides
Yes,
later,
of
right?
course.
So we can obviously distribute that to those who are not able to attend, because we'd like to obviously promote this as much as possible. And the other thing is that with the time allowed, we won't get through all the questions. So if you're okay with that, we will consolidate those that we're not able to do and send it to your office for therefore further to get back, because this is a dynamic process. And as you might appreciate, dealing with European chambers, we are part of it. And we wish to also work and see the country progress and develop and be with it as one. Let me first of all make a comment, and then I'll ask some specific questions. Timing.
Timing.
Timing is critical. If you look across the world at stimulus packages, whether it's the Federal Reserve, whether it's the Bank of England, the European Bank, essentially it's act now, because we have to do as much as we can. And I appreciate the discussions you're having, but obviously the impact is already going on now in terms of layoffs. And if we can talk about unemployment, we've seen announcements made by various companies. So I'd like to get a sense from you, and I appreciate it's not totally in your hands, of sense of urgency and when this timing can be, whatever the package is, because the longer it goes on, the more unemployment will become long-term and more harder to avoid. So that's my first question, timing.
Timing. If it was just up to me or the House of Representatives, we did finish it as soon as we can. We started working on this since March, and then we finished before the break. However, because of how things work in government, and as well as the limitations on the legislative, we are hoping with the negotiations that we're doing that we do 140 billion intervention this month, and then come July or August, then another 280, and then probably before the end of the year, or maybe in the first part of the 2021, then another 280, and that will cover the whole amount already. The infrastructure would be a separate one. We are just talking about the financial, the sectoral, and the transitional interventions, and that's the timing. That's what we are pushing for. But there are three parts. There are three sides of this conversation. There's the Senate, there's the House of Representatives, as well as the executive. So I think we will arrive at a certain point, and soon enough. I agree, though. I agree that it should have been a month ago, because other than what they need, it is knowing that there's something coming that is needed by the business sector, and that's why we were trying to push for it to be approved already before even the break. But things happen, so that's where we are right now.
Well, thank you for that. The other one I wanted to refer to is your opening part, which I totally agree with, which is about fear. And to actually say, of course, if you want an economy going and moving again, everybody has to play their role. Whether you go out
Correct.
and buy a meal, whether you buy a coffee, whether you actually give people employment through that. And my question to you is, first of all, you obviously made a mention within your package about mass testing and relating that to specific areas. And by the way, we've also, and all the chambers here are supporters of Project ARC and the work we've been trying to promote, which is J Conception's group. But can I also ask a question? Is it also one of messaging? Because if I look at places in Europe, and we're all together here, there are people going out and there are people acting, and there has not been testing of everyone. So I guess my question to you is it got to be a dual factor, not only testing, but also communication?
Yes, I agree though. I agree. Because of all the pronouncements for the past 3 months, people get scared. I mean, you get scared, I get scared. So it's a way to address that. I know there are questions, for example, on the rapid testing, but testing whether rapid or PCR is better than nothing. So it's whether it's efficient or not, I would say it's more of the messaging that we are trying to impart. That but the thing is, we cannot just do testing of everyone. That's 100 million that you want to test if you want, and that's if you test now, tomorrow they can contract. They can get infected. So it's not really an assurance that negative is negative forever. But what we can do is do a very systematic kind of testing. What we have done in Arise is define what is massive testing, which is different from how DOH defines massive testing. And what we have done in Arise is channel the test kits or the test procedure through DILG, through the LGUs instead of DOH, because we are coming from an economic side here. DOH is a different perspective. It's diagnosis and all that. They address the health of consequences. But what we're trying to do with the massive testing, with the fear factor, is to jumpstart the economy. And that's why we're going at this on a different perspective. And that's what the 10 billion annually massive testing is for.
Okay, well, I'm sure all our chambers support that, because what we want to see is people back and the economy moving. Let me ask you a question in terms of the unemployment, right? Because that's one of your key focus. And if I recall on the presentation, you were talking about funding for a period of time, obviously related it, if I recall correctly, to ensuring that companies keep those employees, right? If I recall. Yeah. My question is, if somebody's already done a layoff, can they now apply if they re-employ those employees? Because obviously there's a timing issue here, right?
Yes.
So I just want to understand the application.
This provision has been through a lot. Because we started with the idea that they have to keep their employees at the start of the quarantine, which was March 15, and then comments came in and inputs came in, and then we started reconsidering. But Chris, the what we are trying to save here are jobs, so we went back to March 15. Now, if you cannot retain 100% and you only retain 25%, you get 25% subsidy. It will be commensurate as to how many you retain. If you retain 50%, you get 50% of your payroll costs. That's how we address that, and that will exclude, I suppose, people like you, executives, and I mean, we cannot, maybe I don't think we can afford, the government can afford the 75% of the executives, but it's that's how we put a limit in a certain time, but the reckoning period would be March 15, commensurate to how many you retain.
Yeah, like I think what all of our companies are involved in is obviously maintaining employment. And in that respect, can I also bring you to, well, first of all, I'll ask a question in terms of the bill. And I appreciate the bill is currently, correct me if I'm wrong, estimated at 1.3 trillion.
Correct.
However, of course, as you've correctly mentioned, there's different negotiations with the Senate, with the executive. So, but if we just keep it at the 1.3 trillion, do you as the authors have an estimate how this could arrest the decline in the economy? Because obviously the forecast on the economy is changing, right? Across many countries, by the way. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the IMF yesterday was more pessimistic than it was, I believe, 2 months ago. So my question is, assuming if this bill went through in its entirety, which we know will be changed, do we know how much it would offset? Because prior to obviously the pandemic, the growth was about 6%. So the question raised is, what do we see as the offset from this bill?
All right. So if you say that where are we now? We're at 6% growth GDP. We're 6%. And if we say we're going towards 3.8, that's how many points? It's about 4 plus 6, that's 10 points, correct? What I learned from the economists, just to simplify it, Chris, for every 200, 198 billion. For every 200, let's say, just to make it easier, 200 billion, that's 1 point. So if you want to go back to 6%, then you need 10 points, correct? From 3.8 to 6.8. So 10 points times 200 billion. That's 2 trillion, correct?
Correct.
That we need. But then also you have to consider that there's the banking sector that's also doing their own interventions. So if there's 1.2 trillion in the stimulus package, including the infrastructure, and I think Diokno mentioned that, Governor Diokno mentioned there's about 800 to 1 trillion, 800 billion to 1 trillion in the market now, in the banks. So basically that's more or less 2 trillion we're talking about. So with that, if that all pushes through, then the multiplier, which is 200 billion, we will have positive growth.
Okay.
That's what's good about this bill. This is a science-based bill. You know, I mean, advocacy came in later, but we had to go through the foundations of macroeconomics. How much do we spend so we can come up with a certain level of GDP?
Very good. There's got a question come in, and it's good you raised the point about the banks and how critical liquidity is. And you also raised, of course, already the intervention by Banco Central, but also the banks need support because it's all interlinked. So the question came in is, what is the definition of the postponement of loans? Our bank, I can't talk about the person, it's just a generic, our bank deferred the installments but offered to put the missed installments at the end of the loan, plus interest missed over the remaining time of the loan. So I guess if I kind of interpret the question, they're wanting to know, are they giving a grace period? I don't think there's a waiving, but what's your view on bank loans, and how, if you can just amplify within the bill the support to banks as well, because it's a critical factor.
Yes, I agree, but we have to go back to the basics. The Philippine banking system is one of the strongest in the world. It's one of the most stable. It's because it's independent of the government. We cannot intervene. The government is not allowed to intervene in the business of the central bank. So there's independence in that sense. So what the bill can only do as much is recommend or suggest, but we cannot impose on them. Otherwise, we have to make a new law that will specifically address what we want the banking sector has to do. So what we have done in the bill actually is the terminology is the banks are to encouraged to
Nice word.
postpone payments of the principal. Now, if the central bank wants it, then that's their prerogative. But as per the powers of the House of Representatives, that's as far as we can do. Because also you have to consider this is a contract between the borrower and the lender, and we
Correct.
cannot violate that. So the lender and the borrower has to talk, and then the lender has to agree, and the borrower has to agree. So, but if we do not put that in the law, that they are encouraged to do so, then they won't do it. It's not an option for the bank. So they're recommended. But what we have heard from the banking sector, well, it depends on who you talk to, but some banks are willing to do this because these are, how do you call that, defaults. And such defaults would affect actually the the banks in terms of their business performance as well as their rating. So some banks are even more than willing to postpone payments of the principal. And the suggestion is that the payments be postponed for 1 year, but the interest, we cannot impose that on them because that's their income as well.
Correct.
If we do that, then the banks will suffer, and that's another problem that we will have. So it's only as far as interest that we even considered as well paying interest on interest, but that we did not adopt that because that was additional budget for the government as well. With this kind of provision, there's no cost to the government.
Okay. Can I bring you now to a very specific sector which has been impacted, which is tourism?
But Chris, it's all those other concessions that the businesses want, whether in terms of like the consumer loans, business loans, and all that. This is something more appropriate to ask from central bank actually, rather than through Congress.
Agreed.
Because they understand, they do understand the business better than us. And they know what tools to use in order to relieve, I don't know, businesses from their problems or the banks from their problems.
Yeah, and as you noted in your presentation, the central bank has acted, as has many central banks across the world, to do this. Can I bring you now to a specific sector that's been very badly impacted, obviously, which is tourism? And linked to tourism, of course, is specifically the airline sector, which is, I think, if you recall, has been supported in many countries. And one idea or question that's been raised, because you talk about domestic tourism, but countries are now looking in various places what they call air bridges. An air bridge is where between two countries you wouldn't have any issues on quarantine, people could travel. This is being specifically looked at in Europe, where tourism is a big factor. So my question is, or been come in, is do you see the possibility of air bridges for the Philippines with countries, let's say in Asia or in other places, which could facilitate, in addition to domestic, also international tourism?
What's air bridges again? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, an air bridge is where a country will have an agreement. So, for example, Spain has just announced everyone can visit Spain without quarantine. So they make up agreements between various countries, and this facilitates tourism, which is a big factor in many places. So an air bridge is an agreement between two countries that would then facilitate tourism between those two countries.
Yes. As of honestly, I don't think now we are ready for international tourism. Basically, we don't have the facilities to ensure that the health facilities more than anything else, to ensure that there's no, our borders are secure in terms of as far as the COVID is concerned. But you have to remember, this is this country has 100 million population. And with just 100 million or half of that or 1/4 of that, that's more than enough to sustain our tourism industry. We just have to repurpose or to rechannel our efforts in marketing. But I think could be self-sustaining even just for the next year. I do believe that, but I do believe that we have more than enough. This is a very big consumer market, the Philippines, and that's one of our strengths. So if we do not have things in place yet, I don't think that's something that would be so urgent because there is another market, which is here actually, that could sustain the tourism industry.
Okay. We have a number of our member companies across the different chambers represented today are in the PESA zone, in that sector. And obviously the question then is, one, does this bill give support to PESA companies or the PESA to help those companies? And of course, they are also struggling with rent and other things. And the question, of course, is there foreign companies? Does this Arise bill help support them as foreign companies operating in the PESA zone?
But they are registered here in the Philippines, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so that makes them Filipino companies as well, just far known. So the transitional, the one I discussed earlier, which was the wage subsidy and all those interventions, as well as the financial, is across the board. It does not distinguish. Maybe in some parts there's priority to the smaller ones, micro, small, and or micro, small, and medium, but it does not distinguish because as long as you are here and you have Filipino employees, you get wage subsidy and you can avail of the cheap loans that's in the bill.
So it's open to everyone.
It's open to everyone. It does not distinguish whether you're registered in an economic zone or not. It does not distinguish whether you're in one region or not, or you're in an urbanized or rural community. So it's all companies because we did that because it was hard. You know, what the most difficult part of this process was to hear all the sad stories of all industries, and it's hard to say no, but so we had to do something that will address. We have been hearing from the live events, from the creative industries, from agriculture to OFW to the jeepney drivers and all that. It's difficult to choose which one. It's hard to play God at this moment, but everybody's suffering, so we made interventions that would apply to all industries, to all kinds of companies.
Okay, that's very good to hear. Can I, in your presentation, you made a reference to returning OFWs, if I recall correctly.
Correct.
And I believe, while the figure is hard to estimate, I believe you estimated or at least had an indication it could be 500,000 if my memory
Correct.
is good. So a question has come in from one of the members is, could there be a wage subsidy for companies that specifically hire returning OFWs, as these are added to the workforce, generally highly skilled, but also highly priced? I mean, highly priced, I assume, because they've been working abroad in areas where obviously salaries are higher or there's been little or no tax. So just your views on that.
No, we don't have that. The only thing that we specified for OFWs is actually give them wage subsidy as well, because they've been sent back or they cannot leave anymore. But we did put a wage subsidy for OFWs, the registered ones, at 15,000 for 2 months, just to address that while they're still looking for jobs. But no, we don't have any incentives as to companies that will hire OFWs. We do have the livelihood trainings and the wage subsidy, but not addressed to the companies hiring.
You made a reference to that many of the small and micro companies are not
registered.
Are not registered. Could you just expand a little bit more, because obviously to support them or to give them funding, you need to get them registered, right? Because obviously
Correct.
one of the you're facing is a mechanism. So could you just expand further on that? That's one of the questions raised.
You see, like when you go to the provinces and you go to, I don't know, like a barangay in Bukidnon or in Iloilo. Now there's a sari-sari store in every corner. There's vegetable sellers, fish vendors, and all that. They're not registered. So they're actually recorded as informal sector. Um, but but it will be difficult for the government to give them subsidy or any kind of intervention if they're not in the database of the government. So in order to help these individuals or companies that are not registered. What we envision is the utilization of negosyo centers, which is already in place.
Mm.
Every municipality has its own enterprise center, or however they call that, and negosyo centers through DTI. So what we hope to do with this bill is that there will be a massive registration of all these informal businesses that we have in our communities. It will be it's an uphill battle, actually. It's difficult to do that, but if the LGU wants its constituents to receive the intervention or any subsidy or any help from the government, they need to be registered. So it's also for in the interest of the LGU to be proactive on this. So that's our objective, actually, and these are some of the hardest hit uh, due to the pandemic, and we hope that the interventions reach them. But if they're not registered, then it might not be possible. So that's the objective, actually, and we didn't put a budget on that, but we had to. That was a lengthy discussion on this, that we had to find a way to implement this in order for the transitional and the financial and the sectoral interventions can reach this informal sector.
Okay, I'll ask a couple more, then we'll probably close off because we appreciate your time and everything else. You talked about the quarantine period, and the Philippines is one of the longest. One of the members actually said, I think it's 100
100?
days. Yeah, that's a long time. Now,
That's a long time.
my question is, and obviously it's not totally in your, I appreciate, but I just like your thoughts. How do you see it going forward? Because a lot of countries are anticipating that there will be spikes in COVID, or obviously we wish to avoid that, but they're trying to deal with that on a much more localized basis. And
Mhm.
overall lockdowns is a very blunt instrument, if I use that terminology, right? So they're looking at more specific areas. How do you see that? Because obviously the 100 days, as you've rightly pointed out, has had a big economic impact.
Mhm.
And obviously what companies want to see is how, and this also has an impact on planning. The thing I should also mention is that the German chamber did a survey, as did the British chamber, and obviously apart from what you've correctly pointed out, it was also disruption in supply chain, it was a loss of demand, and if I may say, inconsistent applications by different LGUs. I mean, transport not agreed, stop.
Inconsistent.
Yeah. And that created a lot of issues, right?
That's true.
So I just like to get your view on how you see it going forward, and whether you get that sense from Congress and the government that going forward we're going to keep the economy going as we can, because it's not in. And this was a point actually raised in one of the seminars with webinars with Secretary Lopez, that obviously the economy works hand in hand with health as well. So we'd just like to get your views on how you see it going forward.
When earlier in the day, uh, you know that the former president Jimmy is an economist, so she's leaning towards the economy. This it does not have to go one against the other, but she pointed out we are at a stage. that we have to consider things. And you have to consider that the mortality rate is what was that? 0.4% or 4%? Lower than the than the world average. It's
Yes, it
quite
is.
low.
Very low.
And we are losing about 1.8 billion pesos per day of lockdown or per day of quarantine. That's why we came up with the 1.8 trillion.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we're 100 days. That's correct. So tomorrow it will be 1 point. so, so we're at the stage that we have to consider that there's almost what 90% of the population is suffering because of the pandemic. So we have to balance it. And right now, I would lean more towards the economy, because if we do not address that, then this 4% mortality rate is nothing to 20% unemployment. So if we reach 20 million, we are at around 10 million right now, because the survey was 7.7, was done in April. I do hope that we start thinking more, do more forward thinking. I understand. I totally understand the situation of executive, because it is a confusing. It is complicated. It's something that's been unprecedented, and it's chaotic to work at the executive right now. It's the DSWD has to distribute billions of pesos in matter of a few weeks, and they used to do that every 6 months or every quarter of the year, smaller. So it is confusing. DOH is confused because there's too many things at the same time, and DOLE has so many problems with OFWs as well as in the unemployment. So, but I'm hoping that, I call it the fog of war, Chris. It's when there's chaos, when there's a war, you don't know, the communication is disrupted. You can't see past the fog. You can't see where your enemies are, who your enemies are. But now I think the dust is settling in, and I think in a few weeks time start regrouping and start being more efficient. I do not fault the executive, because I totally understand. I mean, even just for us in our own homes, we still get confused on what is happening. But I agree, though. There's still so much uh, uh, coordination among agencies as well. Levels of the executive from the national to the barangay level is still not that organized. And but it's a work in progress. It's slow. I recognize that it's very slow and very uh, unresponsive at sometimes, but we're getting there, and I'm very hopeful that Congress, both the House and the Senate, will start working on it more towards more far in the future, not just what's happening today, and also the executive will start assessing on what's happening. And I think I would go for, let's go save lives because of the economic recession. So rather than just the health aspect.
Well, we'd like to probably close it there now. First of all, we will obviously like to get your slides. We'll distribute the slides.
No problem.
We will also consolidate and send to your office the other questions that, just due to timing, we were not able to ask. We'd like to thank you sincerely for today's time. We know you're very busy. But also, I think more importantly, we'd like to thank you and all the authors of the Arise Bill, because as chambers, as companies involved in the Philippine economy, we see the need for an economic stimulus. And I can only stress the point on behalf of everybody on timing. There is a need to move. And I know you do.
Yeah. Hopefully you can help me keep the fire burning.
We
Let's
do.
keep on pushing. Let's keep pushing.
Well,
I know we totally, the members of Congress totally understand. We have been doing this for so long, and still we're talking about it. And hopefully we any chamber of, or any individual who has a way to push for this, then that would help a lot, because this is not for Congress, this is not for the House of Rep, this is not for the politicians, for the business community as well as for the employment of many Filipinos. So hopefully we get somewhere within the month or so. So let's not stop working on it, and keep pushing.
totally agree. I'd just like to make one other statement today. So first of all, on behalf of my fellow chambers, again, I'd like to thank you. So apart from the British Chamber, the other chambers on today with all the people attending is the French Chamber, the Dutch, the European, the German, the Nordics who are kindly hosting this, and the Spanish. We have many companies. The British Chamber alone has over 300 members, and obviously today there are many, many companies. And I think we just like to emphasize that our members are both obviously our national companies, but we also have Filipino companies, and we're here long term, and we have an overall desire to promote and grow together the Philippine economy. So please understand our strong support, and we particularly appreciate your time and the work you have done, Joey Salcedo, Stella Kimbo, and everybody else in Congress. And we wish you the best of luck, and we will be pushing and supporting as well. So,
Chris, can I just like one
sure.
we are at the stage now that we are also looking at the policy reforms, and I do understand that your chambers also have concerns that, and I would like to set some kind of meeting with all your chamber representatives for us to discuss on what you think should be reforms, structural reforms or long-term reforms that the congressman needs to push. So I'll talk to you about it in the future. Now I have like 3 weeks already full, but probably next month we can set it up. But rest assured that we are supportive. And in fact, me personally, I've been pushing. I've sponsored the Public Service Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization, the Foreign Investment Tax, and this one. So we've always been me personally, I've been supportive of foreign direct investments with a certain safeguards. But let's work on it together, and I think we're gonna have a better start in 2021. So thank you very much for the interest and the support.
Thank you too. Can I wish everybody, so first of all, for everybody who's attended, there will be a recording of the webinar through your respective chambers. Again, thanks to all the chambers who've been here today, but a special thanks to Congresswoman or Cong, Sharon Garin. Let's just give a round of applause. Sorry, it's just me, but I'm sure everyone's doing it. And we very much appreciate your time and commitment. Have a great day. Thank you very much to everybody who's been listening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much.